Professor West, I want to pick up. You may have seen me having a chuckle because let's put it on the table here. The reason I was having a chuckle is because the Liberals have put forward a piece of legislation that is prepared to get to the end without respecting the means of constitutionality. They want to get to the ends of law enforcement that I think we all want to get to. But at the end of the day, Parts 14 and 15 have laudable components that are not necessarily constitutionally compliant. So the reason I chuckled wasn't at your answer. I chuckled because it was, well, I guess you're entitled to your opinion. You have a doctorate in law. I've looked up your credentials. You're eminently qualified. This isn't just an opinion. Okay, this is something that is shared by a number of people. I'm not sure what my colleague did. I mostly prosecuted internet offenses against kids. So I'm very well aware of lawful access and the Bajkovic's decision. Parts 14 and 15 failed because public opinion prevailed against clearly what I would characterize, in my view, as elements that were concerning. I don't think that you and I probably stand alone in thinking that there were elements in Parts 14 and 15 that weren't constitutionally compliant. And I'm not trying to belabor this point. I'm trying to make the point of, everybody in the government can say, wow, Parts 14 and 15, pass them right away. It's just not the way it works unless you want the legislation to get struck down. I just want to give you a chance to comment on that, please.
Well, I think part of the problem with elements of 14, more specifically, 15, I think could probably get there through amendment in committee, but especially on issues around 14, especially on issues of the demand letter, to speak to the issue of, well, there's been consultation. There's never been consultation on that element of the bill in the past. I've been studying lawful access since I was 3 law degrees ago, and that's not something that has ever been put forward in legislation, and there was no consultation on that in 2016, so there has been no consultation with stakeholders and privacy advocates and other academics on that specific element of the bill, and I think that was one area in particular where consultation would have helped alleviate the very real concerns that privacy and civil liberties advocates have in this country.
Certainly. In fact, now, this is way before I got into Parliament, but then Justice Minister Vic Taves introduced lawful access and was roundly mocked by the Liberals, and there was that famous quote, I'm not going to repeat it again, and yet this bill goes further, as I understand it, than the bill that Vic Taves put forward that was mocked by the Liberals. So it is a bit rich that we come in here and people try to say, we really need lawful access and try to get people to say that. But I want to move on to something else, and that's data retention. This is actually a really important point. I know that in my prosecutorial work, data retention was really difficult because you have service providers that their data takes up air quote space, right? You have to store it somewhere, and that costs a lot of money. I think we're on the same? Yeah, of course. And so it's in a provider's best interest to get rid of that data as quickly as possible. But when you get rid of that data, you extinguish law enforcement's ability to recover or to obtain that data. Am I being clear here?
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So when we have complex investigations, and I think an ISP address is 3 months typically, and then it changes?
It depends on the provider. It can be minutes in certain instances.
So most complex investigations don't end within 3 months. You'd agree with that?
I would defer to my law enforcement colleagues on that one.
Mr. Bedard, Mr. Sauvé, sometimes they take years. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes they take years. And, if we were just even to talk about child pornography, for example, that can take months, if not years.
Typically, because it's also a workload issue, because the report goes to Washington, D.C., then it goes to the RCMP in Ottawa, then it goes to local law enforcement, and depending on how busy they are, to write up now they have to write up a production order because of Bajkovic's to get what would normally be typical or easily accessible information. So if an investigation takes a year and the data is only retained 3 months, that's crippling to law enforcement, is it not?
I'm sorry to interrupt. The question was excellent. We have to wait for the answer because we now need to move to MP Blair.